All right, we're back with another Lorehammer video. I'm hoping you guys got a chance to take a look at Turin's video about all the Total War Warhammer 2 goodies that were announced today. If you haven't gotten a chance to look that over, do look at the comment section. I'll put a link in there for you. But I want to go over two of the things that were mentioned in some of those announcements and in Turin's video that kind of spurred me to make this video real quick. But we're covering in this the Vampire Coast and Estalia, which are two NPC factions that were confirmed will be a part of Lustria and even the Old World itself. So there's not a whole ton of information on these two factions, even in the books themselves. So it's going to be interesting to go into this for you guys so you can hear a little bit about what makes the Vampire Coast what it is, what makes Estalia what it is. And we've gotten a taste for Estalia already, but I really want to dig down into the Vampire Coast to start off with. We'll round it all out with Estalia. But the Vampire Coast itself, in the loosest sense of the word, was founded by Luthor Harkon. And we've already kind of talked about Harkon himself and Warlock Harkon. But he was a vampire that was created by Abhorrash. And he was actually the harbor guard in Neferata back in the day. And him and Wallach were, I believe, either brothers or cousins. It's one or the other. And we know Wallach because he's a gentleman who goes to Bretonnia and creates, well, not really Bretonnia, but he goes and creates the Blood Keep. And we get all the goodies from him that come out of that. Eventually the Red Duke, and so on and so forth. But he's why we have blood dragons in the game for vampire counts, if we want to talk about that. Well, him and Abhorrash. But essentially what happened was there was a Norscan raiding party, right? And that raiding party found an Empire trade ship and sacked it, raided it, right? And in it is a sarcophagus of Harkon himself. And Harkon, being a vampire, rises from this sarcophagus as it's taken onto the Norscan ship and turns the entire raiding party into the undead. Eventually the ship crashes ashore and he has his undead sailors and then starts to raise more zombies from Lustria, because he lands on Lustria on the eastern portion of it, right closest to the sea, the World Sea. And he gets into, at this stage, he kind of gets into a lot of skirmishes with the Lizardmen as he starts to loot temples. Luthor Harkon has this obsession with magic items, the arcane, and things that are going to bolster his power. The books kind of say that he had the capability to be this world force, this world power, in the same kind of scope as Manfred von Karstein. But instead, he kind of gets embroiled in this own pursuit for personal glory rather than, a total domination type thing going on. But he gets into these multiple skirmishes, like I was saying, looting temples here and there, and eventually he loses a grand battle, a battle of the Eclipse with Cruxagor Nakai. And after that, he kind of retreats back to lick his wounds, and he eventually allies with the Sirens. And from there, he starts to raise ships from the depths of the ocean and creates essentially a vampire fleet of undead. And with that, he kind of cements the title of Pirate King of Vampire Coast. He even kind of gives himself the haughty title of Arch Grand Commodore. And if you know anything about the Age of Sail, you know that admirals and commodores were gentlemen who typically led fleets or were in charge of governors, often of some cities. But more often than not, Commodore had to do with a fleet. And eventually he sacks the city of Axolotl, which is very huge because that is an actual larger city that was inhabited by lizardmen at the time, not just a lizardman ruin. So things don't really end well for Harkon. He discovers a magic tomb at Huatl, another lizardman ruin, and from there he finds this tomb. And that tomb I was talking about, the magic around it, the glyphs and the seals, start to drain the magic from the undead that are excavating this tomb for him. And in a giant fit of rage, Harkon tries to go and break all these runes, break all these seals, and eventually they start draining his actual vampiric life force. They start killing him. And also they're starting to bring Huatl down on top of him as kind of a defense mechanism. And the last second he breaks free of all this, and what happens is these glyphs actually end up, since there's so much magical power imbued in them, they shatter his personality. He's completely insane for the most part. He spends the majority of his time wandering and searching for a cure for this shattered and shambled personality. He's prone to mood swings. He isn't himself. He's got these episodes of extreme slaughter or extreme morose. He's just all over the place. And in the end times, actually, we see him ally with Manfred von Karstein and eventually get killed by Neferata, a Neferata that's corrupted by Nurgle and actually kills him, and that's the last we see of Harkon. But he in that end times period, he gets bouts of his randomness, and he has good days and bad days, like us all, I think. But that really kind of rounds out the Vampire Coast. We don't know a whole ton, so it's gonna be interesting to see what we see, and I'd be interested to see if we get this as a multiplayer playable faction the same way that we get, say, Mousillon. Something that's not a campaign faction, but something we can definitely play as in the multiplayer, because we know it is an NPC faction as of right now. We don't know anything else outside of that. But the other faction that they've mentioned is the Estalian Conquistadors, or Estalia itself. And this is, of course, an old world nation. We've already seen this in the game. It's just south of Carcassonne, the Bretonnian city, and just west of Tilia. And you can actually see in between Tilia and Estalia where Skaven Blight would be in those swamp areas. But we'll get to that when I think the race called Skaven are announced. I don't know. It's a rumor that Skaven exist. Probably not real. Rats of unusual size, they're a myth. Either way, so Estalia is in itself a southern peninsula, and it is reminiscent of the Iberian Peninsula of our world, Spain. And it's surrounded by the Great Western Ocean on the north and west, Arana and Abasco Mountains on the east, and the Southern Sea in, you guess it, the south. And essentially, Estalia kind of pulls from Spanish and Italian influences. Even the name itself is an anagram for España and Italia. You look at those two words, put them together, boom, Estalia, España, Italia. And essentially, there's no real cohesion for Estalia. It's ruled by two large port cities, Bilbao and Magritta. And those are these city-states in the same kind of way that Greece has city-states. It's kind of reminiscent of Castile and Leon, as well as Aragon in pre-dynastic imperial Spain, where we had these two power heads struggling for overall power of Spain, with Granada and the Kingdom of Portugal in the western and southern portions of Spain. But that's the kind of, like I was saying, with a lot of these cultures and a lot of these nations in Total War Warhammer, you get a sense for their roots, and that this root for Estalia is in the Iberian Peninsula. And like I was saying, though, there's no real unifying factor of Estalia, since they're too far south to really worry about chaos. That's what I mean. That's why they've got these two city-states, Bilbao and Magritta, that are essentially the largest and most powerful in the nation. They're not necessarily the rulers of it, since it is so fluid in its city-state kind of mentality. But being that as it may, the cities itself are a little bit younger and they're stronger overall than what I want to call the Germanic Old World, because the empire is essentially the Holy Roman Empire, and you have the border princes like Tilia, the border princes, then you've got Tilia and Estalia, which are kind of more Italian and Spanish influenced. So a bit different, a little bit stronger, a little more strengthened defenses, I guess you could say, because of their more recent run-ins with Araby. In fact, all of Estalia themselves, as a kind of a quick segue here, worships Myrmidia. So they're a very warlike people in the sense that Myrmidia is the goddess of war in the Empire pantheon. And Myrmidia itself is a play on the word Myrmidon. Myrmidon themselves, of course, were the name of the soldiers that fought under Achilles. There's actually a really interesting thing about the Myrmidons and Achilles in the Iliad. They talk about how to be a Myrmidon, you had to have sex with other Myrmidons. And the way that Achilles described this is, you're more likely to fight harder for a man you love than you are for a fellow brother in arms. And that's kind of the weird camaraderie, but also the amazing kind of Greek camaraderie that comes about with the Myrmidons. That's neither here nor there, but it's a cool little side tidbit. But like I was saying, though, Estalia was at one point invaded by the Sultan Jafar from Araby, which kind of spurred one of the great crusades where Empire and Bretonnia go and liberate all of Estalia. And that kind of covers the history of Estalia itself. You've kind of got this this old world nation that is very reminiscent of Spain and Italy in the medieval times. Medieval times in late Renaissance, it's late medieval, early Renaissance is more what it's like, because you have a nation essentially of explorers and swordsmen. There's these diestro, which are skilled duelists and mercenaries. In fact, a lot of Estalia and Italia are mercenaries. If you look at the Dogs of War, I think it's 5th edition army book, it's almost entirely comprised of Italian mercenaries. So it's really important to note that's why we're going to see this type of faction in Total War Warhammer 2, especially in Lustria. They do have a colony in Lustria called Santa Margarita. So I would not be surprised if that's exactly where they're housed. As just kind of a closing tidbit about Estalia, they eventually get overrun and completely taken over by Skaven. So fuck Skaven, and let's not ever have the end times happen. But that kind of covers everything with Estalia and the Vampire Coast. There's not like a whole ton, like I was saying, but it's going to be really interesting to see how Creative Aseembly really fleshes these two factions out, because they have a lot of creative license. Games Workshop at this point has not forsaken, but they've said, okay, 8th edition lore is no longer the lore that we're going with, and the Age of Sigmar is what it is. So they have a lot more freedom to do as they please. That's why we have those Bastillodons with the revivification crystals that are not in the lore or in the books themselves. So we have a chance for Creative Aseembly to kind of get creative while also sticking with the mythos that Games Workshop has created. So I'm really excited to see what more goodies we've got planned from Total War Warhammer 2. Creative Aseembly's doing a really good job of rolling out stuff piecemeal to kind of keep us all on the hook. So I'm really excited to see what more is on the horizon. But if you guys do have any questions about Estalia, Vampire Coast, or even Tilia or anything else from Lustria, just feel free to comment. Let me know. Always happy to answer any questions you guys might have. But have a good one, guys, and take care.